Episode 13, The Brink of Battle. Arendale's choice asterisk, the weekend had arrived, and the armies that would march to the border had fully gathered in Anveld, the capital of Arendale. More than 2,000 trained soldiers stood ready, not only with sharpened weapons and hardened bodies, but also with minds being tested by the weight of what was to come. These were not just men going to war. They were brothers, sons, and fathers leaving their homes behind. They stood in neat rows on the wide parade ground, surrounded by the cold wind of the northern hills. Their breaths steamed into the morning air, and the sound of armor clinking filled the atmosphere with heavy anticipation. The elders, tribal chiefs, and commanders took their place before the troops, offering their final words of wisdom and strength. The mood was somber, like the stillness before a great storm. Each sentence they spoke carried weight, words about courage, loyalty, and the power of unity. The soldiers listened, eyes locked forward, absorbing every word like it might be the last they would ever hear before battle. This war was not just a matter of strength. It would test their spirits, challenge their patience, and demand every drop of discipline and endurance they could muster. They were warned, this was not going to be a swift campaign. Pain, loss, and fear would walk beside them on the road ahead. Among the crowd, standing with calm authority, was King Azfaran, the sovereign of Arendale. He stood beside Marone, his trusted commander, and one of the kingdom's finest minds in the art of warfare. From the very beginning, Azfaran had never desired war. Peace was always his first choice. But sometimes, life offered no other path. Some enemies left no room for dialogue, and some wounds could not be healed with words. He looked at the soldiers, at their glowing eyes full of hope, at the trembling hands trying to steady their spears, at the mixture of pride and fear in their faces. It weighed on his heart more than any crown ever had. "Do not fight with swords alone," Marin said firmly beside him, her voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "War begins in the heart and mind. Strengthen yourself there first. Do not rely only on your weapon." Azfaran turned to glance at the courageous woman beside him. Marin, known for both her fierce presence and brilliant strategy, was a respected figure. She understood the enemy's strengths and weaknesses better than anyone. She had studied the terrain, predicted the movements, and prepared contingency plans. But she also knew the truth. No amount of planning could help an army if its soul was not ready. As the final words were spoken, the soldiers bowed their heads. A deep silence fell over the field. They prayed, not loudly, but with the quiet intensity of men and women placing their lives in fate's hands. In that still moment, the wind seemed to stop. There were no drums, no horns, just the sound of their hearts beating in unison for the land they vowed to protect. Then, as the prayer ended, the troops began to move, gathering their belongings, tightening straps on their armor, inspecting weapons for the last time. The mood shifted from spiritual to practical. Soon, the journey to war would begin. But that silence was suddenly shattered by the sound of hooves galloping at full speed toward the main gate. 3 scouts arrived, breathless and pale-faced, their horses soaked in sweat. Dust clung to their boots, and urgency was written all over their faces. One of them quickly dismounted, carrying a sealed scroll. "A message from the resistance in Isvalon," said one of the scouts, handing the scroll directly to King Azfaran. The whisper of his words seemed to ripple across the field, drawing curious glances from every corner. Azfaran opened the scroll immediately. The moment his eyes scanned the contents, tension grew thick in the air. Something had changed. A decision would need to be made, fast. The message was brief, but powerful. Riza, the daughter of King Sharfan, was reported to be vacationing in the southeastern hills, far from the border and not really powerful guarded. But that was not the only revelation. The message suggested something daring: to kidnap Riza as a way to weaken or perhaps even collapse Sharfan's regime without direct confrontation. The king remained silent for a few heartbeats longer, then handed the scroll to Marin. She read it quickly and raised an eyebrow, a flicker of surprise in her usually unreadable expression. A plan like this was dangerous, risky. but it also held a chance. A rare one, to avoid full-scale war. If they succeeded in capturing Ryza, perhaps they could force Sharfan to negotiate, or even surrender. Without a single battle fought, Azfaran turned toward the commanders. "We must delay the departure," he announced clearly. "There is a new development. Gather all senior advisors. We must hold council immediately." A war council was hastily convened in the center of the field. Tents were not even pitched. They stood in a loose circle, some holding maps, others still in their traveling gear. Every minute counted. Arguments rose and fell. "It's a trap," one said. "But if it's not, it may save thousands of lives," said another. "The girl is dangerous in her own way. Father and Nazma have ever told me before," Marin added. "Her behavior has worsened conditions and she spreads lies and fuels hatred against our people. Sometimes she also spreads hatred against the Scalan people. Just for fun." The debate didn't last long. Time was precious, and clarity came swiftly. They reached a decision. "If we capture Ryza," Marin said, her voice calm and clear, "Sharfan will lose his most precious leverage. He will be forced to bargain. But we must act with precision and stealth. This mission is not one of brute force. It requires elegance." Azfaran nodded slowly, weighing the full weight of the choice before him. "Then we plan this journey immediately. Let the army remain prepared. But our focus shifts to this mission. Ryza is now our target." A new map was laid open. The location of the southeastern hills was marked. Scouts confirmed that the area was quiet, with only a few royal guards. If they moved quickly, they could reach her location within 2 nights. A small unit would be dispatched, elite and quiet, known for their ability to slip behind enemy lines. They would travel light, no banners, no drums. Silence would be their greatest ally. Preparations moved at lightning speed. Orders were whispered, not shouted. Horses were chosen, paths were mapped, and disguises prepared. This was not a mission of glory, but one of sacrifice. If they failed, the full wrath of Sharfan would fall upon Arendelle, with no hesitation. And yet, there was hope. Not just hope that the mission would succeed, but hope that war could still be avoided. That perhaps this single action could stop thousands of arrows from ever flying. Azfaran watched the horizon as the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the hills of Everything felt fragile, like the world was holding its breath, waiting to see which path they would choose. Behind him, the soldiers continued to prepare, unaware of the silent storm now building. War was no longer just a matter of steel and strength. It had become a matter of timing, of whispers in the dark, and of one single girl, Ryza, who now held the fate of 2 nations in her hands. The night would fall soon, and with it, the beginning of a secret journey. No one spoke of victory anymore. They spoke only of duty, of the path they must walk, even if it led them into the shadows. And so began the quiet turning of history. Not with the clash of armies, but with the rustle of a scroll and the whisper of a name. Episode 14. The abduction. The night had grown late when Azfaran summoned Marin to a small meeting room in Arendelle's palace. The only light that dared to challenge the darkness of the room came from the flickering lantern hanging from the ceiling. Before a map and rolled-up scrolls of strategy, the young king sat upright, his face full of contemplation. "I want you to lead this mission," Marin Azfaran said, his voice slow yet firm. His gaze pierced through, ignoring any doubt that might grow in the heart of anyone who was handed such a responsibility. Marin did not respond immediately. She stared into Azfaran's eyes, searching for a gap that would allow her to ask why her of all people. But she knew, once trust had been given, there was no room for hesitation. "All right, I accept your command, but this Ryza mission, we truly need to go through with it?" Marin asked. "Ryza, the princess of Isvalon, she has become a symbol of the nobility's ignorance and cruelty, blocking any chance of change. We need to shake them, Marin, not through assassination, but through abduction," Azfaran said. Maer On took a deep breath. We will challenge all of Isvalon. This is not a simple mission. No. This is the beginning of the storm that will engulf everything built on pride, Azfaran replied. The following morning, Marin gathered 12 of the chosen people, both men and women. Most of them were spies and scouts who had infiltrated Isvalon's borders for months. They sat in a circle under a quiet tent, the only sound being the whisper of the mountain wind, bearing witness to their secret meeting. Rise's villa is located in the southeastern hills, not far from the silent stone garden. It's not heavily guarded, since she is not a military leader, Marin explained. But we must proceed with caution. This princess is clever and filled with intrigue. We need to capture her without causing a major disturbance. A woman in a black cloak nodded. We've already built connections with some of the servants there. A few of them are growing tired of her treatment. This princess is not just arrogant. She's been responsible for many deaths with her slander. How many inside can we trust? Marin asked. 6. 3 of them are personal attendants who are in her room every day. They will help clear the path and hold off the guards if needed. Marin looked at them all one by one. We move tomorrow night. No killing unless absolutely necessary. And no one must see us coming. The journey to the villa took 2 days. Marin led the group through the dense pine forest, moving silently and skillfully to avoid us patrol posts. There were shadows in the night, with only the soft sound of their footsteps on the damp earth to mark their passage. On the second night, they camped in a rocky alcove that overlooked the hills where Rise's villa stood. The faint glow of torches flickered in the distance, and through the mist, the silhouette of the villa loomed like an arrogant shadow hanging on the cliff's edge. Marin spoke softly to her team. Tomorrow night, we slip in through the back terrace just after 2. One of the servants will open the way. The rest of you will hold off the front guards with the illusion that Risa is gravely ill. I want all of you to stay focused. Risa must not be harmed, but if she resists with violence, we have no choice. The following day, as the night grew darker and the shadows thicker, Marin led her team towards the designated position. Before they took another step, she gave her final instructions. The air was thick with tension as they stood behind the large boulders that separated them from the villa. This mission is not just about speed. Marin spoke quietly but firmly. We'll use the darkness to slip through, but we must also divert attention. One of you will create a distraction near the front of the villa. Walk toward the guard post and make some noise. A series of sounds, just enough to make it seem like something is happening near the front garden. That will pull their attention, long enough for us to enter through the back. One of the younger men, a scout who had been with the team for some time, nodded. We've studied the reports. We know the guards at the front post are sometimes lackadaisical. We'll use that gap. Marin fixed her gaze on him. Remember, this is not about injuring anyone, but about making sure they don't focus on us. The distraction needs to be convincing enough that they leave the post without suspicion. You'll draw their attention, not create chaos. With that, the group continued their journey towards the back of the villa with measured steps. One by one, they disappeared into the shadows of the night. Within minutes, their plan would unfold. One of the scouts, a young man with sharp eyes, asked, "What if the alarm is raised? We have a retreat route south toward Sereno, but we will not fail," Marin answered, her tone unwavering. The night of the raid arrived. The sky was covered by thick clouds, hiding the moonlight. The 6 sympathetic servants were already in place. One of them, an elderly woman named Bushra, waited in the back kitchen with the door slightly ajar. Maer on, and 2 others slipped inside. They moved quickly but quietly through the cold marble corridors. Bushra gave them a signal, then pointed to a spiral staircase leading to the upper chambers. At the top, 3 attendants had prepared a sleeping potion in Rise's drink, but the princess had yet to consume it. She sat on a red velvet sofa, brushing her hair in front of a large mirror, unaware that her fate was about to change forever. Marin quickly opened the door. 2 of her female soldiers rushed in first, quickly binding Rise's hands. "What is this? Who are you? Traitors! Stop! I single quotes LL scream," Risa shouted. but Bushra quickly covered her mouth with a cloth. "We don't want to hurt you, Your Highness," Marin whispered. "But you're coming with us tonight." Ryza thrashed and cried, shouting insults, even threatening them, but the servants stood silent, some even holding back smiles as they saw the once feared princess reduced to nothing, powerless before the very people she had once tormented. "You all, I'll have you executed. I will make sure every one of you will be hanged at the city gates," she screamed, but her threats drowned in the cover of night. The journey back to Irindale was not easy. Ryza complained constantly, demanding rest every hour, whining about hunger, and asking for her personal attendants, who were no longer with her. "This is torture. You treat a princess like an animal. Do you not know who I am?" she wailed. Maer remained calm, but inside, she was sickened by the princess's arrogance. "You know, we have our reasons for doing this," Marin replied one night as they rested in a cave. "Reasons? Are you jealous? Because I'm above you? Because you have no royal blood?" Ryza spat. "No," Marin said, her gaze fixed on the small fire in the circle of stones. "Because you think royal blood gives you the right to kill innocent people simply because they dislike the color of your dress. You've slandered many, including men who didn't like you, until they were sentenced to death." Ryza fell, silent for a moment, but only for a second. "Common people like you always judge because you have no idea how difficult it is to be me." Marin turned to look at her, her eyes cold. "We know, because our relatives became your victims." There were no more words between them that night, only the sound of Ryza's frustrated sighs and her soft whimpers as she drifted off to sleep, her face twisted with anger. By the fourth dawn, as the gates of Irindale came into view in the distance, Ryza was exhausted. Her clothes were ragged, her hair disheveled, and her voice lacked the defiance it once carried. Marin gave orders for the guards to open the secret path to the holding chambers. There was no cheer of victory, only silence. For tonight, victory did not come from a bloody battle, but from the courage to kidnap the symbol of the rotting luxury from within. In the underground cell where Ryza would be kept temporarily, Azfaran was already waiting. He looked at the young woman before him. Yesterday, she had been the symbol of beauty in Isvalon, the pride of a kingdom. But now, standing before him, was someone too fragile to hide behind her title. "You do not deserve to touch this land," Ryza murmured, her voice quiet and bitter. "You think you've won?" Azfaran stepped closer. "I don't need to win. I just need a peaceful world, and I want the world to know who you truly are." And with that, the prison door slowly closed, locking the beginning of a great change in Isvalon. Episode 15. A letter from Arundalif. In Anveld, Irindale felt especially quiet that night. The cold night wind swept between the sturdy stone walls, carrying a sense of solitude only those long separated from the outside world could truly feel. Ryza, the princess of Isvalon, now imprisoned, sat in her cell, her sharp eyes gazing out through the narrow window at the pale stars above. Beneath her proud and hateful expression, there lived an undeniable fear. It was not merely fear of captivity, but fear of losing control, of watching her influence slip into the hands of those she once called inferior. She was not prepared for a future stripped of her royal privilege. Arrogance had long shielded her, but now, stripped of title and throne, she was left with nothing but the echo of her own bitterness. Outside the prison, in a warmer and more comfortable room, Azfaran sat calmly. In front of him, a sealed scroll rested on a broad wooden table. The letter was addressed to Sharfan, the king of Isvalon, Azfaran's nemesis. Within its folds were words that Ryza would never be allowed to read. That to have his daughter returned, Sharfan would have to surrender his throne. Azfaran glanced at Marin, who stood beside him. Their eyes met in silence, but they understood each other without speaking. This was a turning point, an irreversible step, one that would shake the very core of what Isvalon had built. Ryza now stood as a symbol of everything cruel and unjust. that had taken root in the kingdom. There would be no compromise. This letter must reach Sharfan, Azfaran said quietly, his tone measured. Deliver it firmly, with no embellishments. There will be no negotiation. Mara nodded, stepping forward to retrieve the scroll. There's one thing we must ensure, she said, voice steady. He must know this isn't a request. If we leave room for hesitation, he'll use it to stall and maneuver. Azfaran's gaze deepened. I know, he replied. This is not just about Rise, it's about our standing in Irendaland, the future of all Isvalon. Moran took the scroll into her hands, feeling the weight not only of parchment, but of history itself. They were no longer dealing with a spoiled, prideful princess, but with a king who would do anything to retain his power. Riza, in the end, was merely a pawn in a much larger game. Far away, in the marble halls of Iscalan's palace, life continued as usual, at least on the surface. But change had begun to stir at the edges. King Sharfan sat atop his silver throne, his expression unreadable as reports flooded in from his ministers. The disappearance of Riza had slowly begun to spread among the inner circles, igniting whispers that refused to be silenced. No one knew for certain where she had gone or who had taken her. Suddenly, a messenger from Irendale arrived at the palace gates. Clad in a dark cloak, he entered without fanfare, drawing the attention of every guard he passed. Without uttering a word, he handed over a scroll, sealed with the symbol of Irendale. The scroll was taken immediately to the throne room. King Sharfan, this is from Irendale, the steward announced, his voice trembling with uncertainty. It bears a message of great urgency. Sharfan took the letter with cold fingers, his eyes fixated on the seal, Irendale's mark, the very emblem of the new power rising to challenge Iscalan's dominion. Slowly, deliberately, he broke the seal and unfolded the letter. It was not a long message, but every word was laced with iron. The daughter you really loved and spoiled so dearly, so much that she acted without consequence, spreading lies and falsehoods. Riza is now in our hands. If you want her to return alive and unharmed, there is one price to pay: the throne. Step down from power, and you will see her again. Refuse, and she will never set foot in Iscalan again. There was no signature. There didn't need to be. Silence hung thick in the chamber. The ministers, advisors, and generals present dared not speak. Sharfan read the letter a second time, then a third. Each time, his jaw tightened further. He crushed the scroll in one hand. Prepare a reply, he said sharply. But we will not bow to such a junk threats. No one dared challenge him, yet in their eyes, a question lingered. Was he still in control, or was the kingdom itself slipping from his grasp? What will a king do in this situation? Back in Anveld, Azfaran stood upon the balcony of the eastern watchtower, the winds brushing his cloak aside. In the distance, the mist-covered hills of Irendale stretched toward the horizon, where a war yet to be fought was already being written in silence. Beside him, Marin spoke softly. Do you think he'll surrender? Azfaran didn't answer right away. His eyes were focused far ahead, beyond the clouds, beyond the walls. He will try to twist it, he said at last. That's what tyrants do when the walls begin to close in. But no matter what he chooses, the people will see what we've done. That matters more than any throne. He turned to her. Let the fire be kindled, one that burns only to clear the path for something new. Marin stayed silent for a moment, but her brows furrowed as if she were holding back a thought that refused to rest. Azfaran, she said, her voice quieter than before, but edged with concern. What if Sharfan doesn't answer with words? Azfaran turned slightly, intrigued. The wind tugged gently at the folds of his robe. You mean ... A rescue mission, Marin finished. A small force. Loyalists, or worse, mercenaries. Not an open war yet, but something just enough to retrieve Riza, something covert, hidden in the night. Azfaran considered it, his gaze drifting toward the torchlit roads below that led from Anvilid's gates into the valleys. His silence was not uncertainty, but a weighing of possibilities. He would never risk a full army. Not yet, Merrin continued. It would spark the war before he's ready. But a smaller strike. It's the kind of arrogance he's known for. Bold, reckless, believing he can win her back with a blade instead of surrender. She's too valuable to him, Azfaran murmured, not just as a daughter, as a symbol of his rule. If Ryza returns unharmed, it validates his power. If she remains with us, it weakens him before his court. And if she dies, then he has a martyr, Merrin finished. Grimly there was a long pause. The night around them felt even colder. Azfaran stepped away from the edge of the balcony and began to pace. He won't send knights in armor. He'll use shadows, men who blend into the outskirts. Hunters, trackers, maybe former scouts from the old border divisions. People who know how to kill without leaving a sound, because they know if they do open war, we will kill Princess Ryza. Merrin nodded, and they'll target the prison directly. Not the gates, the east wall, perhaps. The blind spot we identified last month. We need to reinforce it, Azfaran said, without making it obvious. If we appear too guarded, it confirms we expect an attempt. He'll take that as fear and act sooner. Merrin's tone grew more urgent. Then, we must prepare guards who are not just soldiers, but listeners, those trained to detect the unnatural in the quiet. The whisper before the scream. Azfaran looked at her, a soft admiration in his eyes. You think like a commander. She gave a faint smile. I think like someone who's seen too many tyrants escape through carelessness. He crossed his arms, considering. Very well. Double the watch near the prison and the borders, but make it look like routine drills. Position archers in the high towers, unseen, and send word to Isolde. We may need her spies to listen among the merchants. If strangers begin asking for the prison layout or offering coin for silence, we must know. Merrin nodded again, already forming plans in her mind, but Azfaran wasn't done. There's one more danger, he said, his voice low. What if Ryza collaborates? Merrin's expression sharpened. You think she'd help them? She might recognize a rescue attempt, hear a signal, leave a mark on the window. Anything if she believes she still has value to Sharfan. She may try to use that to her advantage. Merrin exhaled slowly. Then we must ensure she is isolated, not only by walls, but by certainty. She must not believe help is coming. She must begin to question whether anyone even remembers her. That, Azfaran said, will be harder than any wall we build. A sudden gust of wind swept over them, rattling the iron torch beside the balcony. Merrin pulled her cloak tighter. She will not be broken easily, Merrin said softly. She is proud, and proud people burn slowly. Azfaran looked back, toward the horizon, where faint light still clung to the edge of the world. Then we will not rush her ruin, he whispered. We will let it rot from within. Merrin glanced up, studying his face in the torchlight, resolute, yet weary, a man who carried not only duty, but consequence. And then, with her voice steadied again, she asked, Do you believe we are ready if the strike comes? Azfaran paused. No, he admitted. But we will be. Merrin nodded, her voice a whisper, against the cold wind. Then we wait for the answer. But not forever. No, said Azfaran quietly. Not forever. Episode 16. Tension at its peak. The morning in the palace of Isvalon felt darker than usual. Even though sunlight touched the tall stone walls, a heavy shadow lingered in the hearts of everyone in the kingdom. Sharfan, after reading the letter from Arendelle, felt the world spinning around him. There was no more space for doubt. The message was clear. No negotiation. Ryza must be freed, but only under one condition. Sharfan had to step down from the throne. With a blank, unreadable expression, Sharfan walked toward the throne room, where the royal council and generals were already gathered. In the large hall filled with tense whispers, all eyes turned to their king as he entered the room. King Sharfan, Zahil, the chief advisor, spoke with curiosity in his tone. Has a decision been made regarding Arendelle's ultimatum? Sharf looked at him for a moment, his eyes flickering with the kind of confusion only a cornered leader could feel. Arendelle knows exactly how to apply pressure, he he muttered. They demand that I give up the throne. The council fell silent. Eyes turned to one another, measuring the gravity of the moment. This was a high-stakes game that could not be approached lightly. Stepping down would mean the end of Sharfan's reign, but attacking Arendelle might result in the death of the captive princess. If we attack, one of the generals said, we might win. We are stronger. But we must think about the princess's safety. They could execute her as a prisoner. Zahil, as always, spoke carefully. Step down from the throne, my king. Hand it over to a younger heir, perhaps someone better suited to face this changing age. We can avoid a great war and preserve our influence through other means. Sharfan clenched his fist on the table, holding back his anger. If I step down, he said with a deep voice, I lose everything I've built, my power, my honor, and my place in the eyes of the world. But in his heart, doubt had begun to grow. He knew this decision was not just about the throne. Ryza was his daughter. Yet he also knew the future of the kingdom outweighed personal ties. Isvalon had been ruled with strength, but strength could collapse in a blink if one did not know when to retreat. I will not step down, he said finally, firmly. Isvalon will stand. We will find a way to reclaim Ryza without bowing to Arendelle's cheap threats. I will never do that. His decision sent a wave through the throne room. Sharfan had chosen to stay, no matter the price that might follow. The morning after the council's dispersal, the atmosphere in the throne room of Isvalon felt more oppressive than ever. The sun's rays barely seemed to penetrate the heavy air, as if they too were unsure whether to break through the dark clouds gathering over the kingdom. Sharfan sat at the throne, still, as though carved from stone. His expression, unreadable to anyone who dared look, hid a turbulent mind beneath. Doubt had begun to creep in with the arrival of Arendelle's ultimatum. The choice before him: retreat from the throne or risk everything. Even Ryza gnawed at his soul. Outside, the kingdom moved on, unaware of the fragile moment the king was facing. His resolve to hold on to power had been strong, but now every decision seemed weighted with peril. What was he truly willing to sacrifice? His pride, his legacy, his own daughter. As he sat there, lost in his thoughts, a shadow crossed the room. Zahil, the trusted advisor who had stood by his side for years, entered with his usual calm demeanor. His steps were deliberate, calculated, and when he spoke, his voice was soft, yet carried with it an unsettling conviction. Your Majesty, Zahil began, as he approached with a glass of wine in hand. I trust you are well. Sharfan barely acknowledged the greeting, his eyes still distant, focused on nothing in particular. I've made my decision, he muttered, his voice low and rough. We'll stand firm. Isvalon will not bow to Arendelle. We will never. I'll not be made to look weak. Zahil did not flinch at the king's words. Instead, he smiled softly, a hint of something unreadable in his gaze. He set the wine down and took a step closer, now directly in front of Sharfan. Of course, Your Majesty, your strength is unquestionable. But I must remind you, sometimes strength alone is not enough to win a war. Sometimes it takes a different kind of strategy. Sharfan's gaze flickered toward Zahil. What do you mean? What strategy do you have? The issue here isn't just about defeating Arendelle, Zahil said, his tone shifting slightly, becoming more insistent. It's about ensuring the safety of your daughter, Princess Ryza. She's their prisoner. And if we push too hard, they will do whatever they must to eliminate her. They might even kill her if you force their hand. Sharfan's jaw clenched. He knew the truth in Zahil's words. Ryza was the only piece Arendelle had in this cruel game. His mind raced. He could not afford to lose her. But Zahil continued, ever the manipulator, playing on Sharfan's fears. You cannot risk losing her. Zahil added, his voice smooth, almost coaxing. But also, remember, Arendelle is pushing us to a point where we may soon have no choice but to act. If we strike too hard, it could cost us everything. Your throne, your legacy, even your family. Sharfan's fingers curled into fists on the armrests of the throne. His heart was pounding in his chest, torn between his duty to his people and his duty to protect his daughter, Zahil, saw the flicker of doubt in his eyes and pressed further. Perhaps the right course of action is not to fight directly. What if we make them see we have nothing to lose? What if we force them to back down without lifting a sword? Sharfan raised an eyebrow. How do you propose we do that? Zahil's smile grew, his eyes glinting with a cold calculation. We could ... make a statement. A move that would make it clear that you are willing to sacrifice everything, even Ryza, just to keep your crown. It will make them doubt your resolve to protect her. And then, they will know that you have nothing to lose. Sharfan's pulse quickened. Zahil's words seemed to pull at his deepest instincts. You want me to use her as leverage? He asked, almost in disbelief. Zahil shook his head, his expression serene. Not leverage, Your Majesty. I am suggesting a more ... powerful message. If Arendelle sees that you are willing to risk your own blood for the throne, they will fear you. They will fear what you're capable of. They will hesitate. But what of Ryza? Sharfan whispered, more to himself than Zahil. Zahil's voice dropped to a near whisper. Sometimes, in war, sacrifices must be made. She is your daughter, yes, but she is also a tool. The world will remember how far you went for the throne. The message you send will make them reconsider any further demands. Besides, we all know your daughter's reputation. People have been executed simply because of her slander against those she dislikes. But she is still my daughter, Sharfan replied. Sharfan's mind raced. The weight of Zahil's words pressed upon him, pushing him into a corner where every decision felt like a losing move. But Zahil wasn't finished. Your people will see your resolve. They will understand that their king will not back down. That is the strength that will inspire them to fight. If you stand firm, if you show your willingness to sacrifice your own flesh and blood, then you will secure your reign. The world will respect you, even if they fear you. Sharfan sat in silence, the room heavy with the weight of Zahil's suggestion. A part of him recoiled at the thought of using his daughter as a pawn in this dangerous game. But another part of him, the part that had always longed to solidify his rule, felt the lure of Zahil's words. The idea of striking fear into the hearts of his enemies, of ensuring that Isvalon would never again be looked down upon, seemed intoxicating. I will think on it, Sharfan finally muttered, his voice hoarse. Zahil bowed his head slightly, his eyes never leaving Sharfan. Of course, Your Majesty. Take all the time you need. Just remember, the longer you hesitate, the more power Arendelle gains. As Zahil turned to leave, he cast one last glance over his shoulder. And remember, sometimes the greatest strength comes from the willingness to do what others cannot, what others would never dare. The door closed behind him, leaving Sharfan alone with his thoughts. The room felt colder now, as if the shadows had grown deeper. Zahil's words echoed in his mind, twisting, turning, until they became a mantra. He could not shake. He should make a decision by tomorrow and discuss the strategy with all the commanders. Episode 17, Footprints Among the Shadows. The scent of agarwood incense curled through the air of the grand strategy room in the palace of Isvalon. Whispers floated beneath the smoke, mingling with the scratch of quills on ancient maps. King sat upon his throne, surrounded by military advisors whose faces bore the marks of exhaustion, fury, and quiet shame. Princess Ryza, the blood of the palace, had been taken by the enemy. Now, they sat in a circle of desperate plans. She's arrogant, yes, but she is still of Isvalon's blood. One general muttered, arrogant is no excuse to let her fall. Another added, his voice sharp with restrained tension. King Sharfan tapped his fingers slowly against the armrest of his throne. Eyes narrowed at the flickering candlelight. Form an elite unit, he ordered at last. No more than 100, only the finest. Only those unafraid to enter Arendelle's lands. From hidden barracks and secret palace corridors, the chosen 100 were gathered, 70 men and 30 women. Trackers, warriors, masters of stealth. They were not ordinary soldiers. They were the shadow of Isvalon's power. trained to move without sound and strike without mercy. As dusk set the sky aflame, they moved. No drums, no cheers, only silent steps through tall grass and hushed prayers whispered behind the doors of the homes they left behind. No banners, no symbols. They traveled through the Western Horse Trail, slipping into the cool, quiet edges of Eirin Dale. Asterisk, go to the quiet hamlet of Varnd, nestled at the edge of Irondale's southeastern woods. The people lived in a fragile kind of peace. After seasons of rumor and shifting winds, they had grown accustomed to the tension that hung over the land like fog present, but distant enough to ignore. That morning, however, the fog felt heavier, not from the weather, but from something unseen, creeping among the trees. Old Thomo, a beekeeper whose legs had long betrayed him, sat beside his hive with a small fire to warm his bones. His eyes, though dimmed by time, caught the faintest ripple in the foliage, bodies slipping between trunks, low to the ground. No flags, no drums, no sound of boots, just silence and motion like ghosts crawling across the forest floor. He did not cry out, he only stared, the stick in his hand trembling. "They have come," he muttered, "but they wear no face." Further, uphill, a little girl named Isla tugged at her mother's cloak as she watched shadows glide across the road near the barley fields. "Are they friends?" she whispered. Her mother pulled her close, eyes narrowing. No soldiers move like that unless they wish not to be seen. She did not wait to explain. Doors were shut, lamps doused. The soft rhythm of a village morning fell silent, as if the very soil held its breath. Whispers spread like fire through dry leaves. The merchants halted their wagons. Shepherds called back their flocks. In the distance, from the bell tower of a small shrine, the watchman rang 3 quick chimes, no louder than a bird's cry, but enough to alert the network of silent eyes that Azfaran had placed across the outer ring of a ring. Not soldiers, not spies, civilians trained to read the wind and the earth, to speak without voice. We saw them, black leather, blades on their backs. They moved like mist through the west. In the village of Kedwan, a weaver's apprentice huddled beneath the eaves of his workshop, eyes wide as he watched the last of the shadows disappear down the gully that led to the central road. He counted them 12, 15, maybe more. Men and women, grim focused, eyes like steel forged in fire. He waited until the last boot print faded into the forest, then darted down to the square, where others had gathered in silence. "They are not here to speak," he said. "They are here for blood." But not all villagers felt hatred. In the house of Morella, a widow with 2 sons, conscripted by Erindale's militia, there was only dread. Her thoughts did not drift to glory or battle, but to the mothers of those intruders' mothers, who might never know what became of their children. She wept not for fear, but for the waste of it all. War had already taken her husband. She feared it now came for her sons she hadn't even buried yet. That night, as the elite unit of Isvalon crept deeper into the land, the villagers along their path lit no fires. Instead, they watched from behind shutters. They listened for a wrong step, a snapped twig, a shouted command, and all the while, they passed messages written in ash and thread covert signals to the Erindale command. No one in the hamlets fought, not with swords. Their battle was silence. Their resistance, vigilance. When Captain Arzilis' squad unknowingly passed the ruins of an old mill, they did not see the pair of brothers hiding in the rafters above, counting their numbers, memorizing their pattern. Nor did they notice the boy who climbed the tree 2 miles south to light a small green lantern just once, and then hide it. A prearranged sign. It was how the militia knew to position archers near the pass called the Raven's Mouth. By the 3rd day, the villagers began packing quietly. Those with children sent them to stay with kin closer to the capital. The elders remained. They always did. "I have survived 2 wars," said Thomo to a messenger. "I have no legs to run, but I have eyes to see. Tell Azfaran, I will light the signal if they pass again." And so, the people of Erindale did not scream. They did not fight, but they watched. and in their watching, they sealed the fate of the shadows that dared creep into their land. What the elite soldiers of Isvalon did not know was this: the soil of Arendelle remembers every footprint, and so do its people. ***, quiet did not mean unseen. Among the dew-covered bushes and thick leaves, Arendelle's watchful eyes had spotted them. Scouts unseen by normal eyes, guardians of shadow who served Azfaran and his plans for defense. From a watchpost near the southern farms, an Arendelle scout sped like lightning toward the guard tower. No movement went unmarked. "They are not ordinary soldiers," said one of the scouts. "Let them come deeper," replied the captain of the watch. "Let them think they're invisible." Day by day, the elite unit pushed deeper into Arendelle. The farther they strayed from their homeland, the quieter the paths became. But behind branches and beneath shadows, Azfaran's silent guards kept their watch. No step went uncounted, like fish swimming into a net. They were unaware of the threads tightening around them. The leader of the elite unit, a woman named Arzella, began to sense something amiss. No resistance, no enemy tracks. "This feels too easy," she whispered. A man behind her nodded. "Or we are being led into a trap." Still, time pressed them onward. Riza had to be found. With resolve, they pushed through the valley toward Enveld, the heart of Arendelle, and where, it was said, Riza was being held. By the sixth day, as night approached, the terrain narrowed. Towering stone walls formed a natural corridor like a bottlesnack. They had unknowingly entered a place the locals called the Raven's Mouth, a natural choke point, known for swallowing entire armies in the past. Suddenly, a long whistle pierced the air, sharp as a blade of wind. The first arrow struck a soldier in the chest. He fell without a sound. Then the sky rained arrows. Panic, screams, barked orders clashed in the echoing gorge. The elite unit scrambled behind rocks and scattered trees. But they were exposed, and Arendelle's archers had the high ground. From crevices in the stone, Arendelle's trained archers unleashed deadly volleys. They did not charge. They crushed, slowly, methodically. Azila drew her sword and shouted, "Break the line, out of the path, scatter, now." But the way was already blocked. Entry sealed. Exit cornered. From the right flank, light infantry of Arendelle descended like silent wolves. The fight turned to close combat. Blood splattered the once quiet green earth. Some of Isvalon's soldiers fought to the bitter end. Some surrendered, some fled into the wild trails and never returned. When the clash of steel and storm of arrows finally quieted, only 17 remained out of 100. Their eyes were hollow, their clothes torn, bodies bruised and stained with dust. Among them, only Arzella stood tall, though her legs trembled. Arendelle's soldiers surrounded them not with gloating, but with a stern, cold respect. "You have entered our land," said one Arendelle captain, "but we will not treat you like beasts. Come to the dungeons of Enveld. The king will decide your fate." With hands bound and heads held high, the last of the elite unit were led through winding paths toward Enveld. The city stood in silence, its watchtowers staring down upon them like the eyes of forgotten gods. At the palace of Arendelle. Night had not fully fallen when the news arrived. "The elite unit of Isvalon has been captured, King said the messenger, kneeling before him. Azfaran looked out the window, where the first stars were beginning to shine. He said nothing for a long time. "War is not just about defeating the body," he said at last, "but guarding the heart from the poison of hate." He turned to Kale and Marin, who stood silently behind him. "Prepare the interrogation hall. I want to hear it from them, why they crossed into our lands, and whether Riza is truly worth being saved by spilled blood." One of the captured soldiers, a man named Farouk, was brought into the stone chamber to speak with Azfaran himself. Despite his wounds, he met Azfaran's gaze without fear. "We didn't come to steal your land," he said. "We were ordered. We were sent to rescue a princess. Even though we ourselves don't know if she deserved to be saved." He paused, then spoke again, calmer this time. "We are not bringers of war. We are the fruit of a king's pride, of his fear to lose. Face Ryza, she is not the reason we left. She is a symbol of power cracking from within. But we had to obey, or our families back home would suffer in our place. Azfaran fell silent for a moment, then gave his order, hold them. Do not kill them, even if some of the elite women were already on the brink of death. That night, Arendelle did not celebrate victory. They only recorded it, for the war had not ended. It had only begun to stir from beneath the earth, waiting for its fire to rise brighter than ever. Episode 18, A Letter Not Written in Ink, **. Anger is not a lightning strike that flares once and fades. It is an ember that burns slowly, gathering strength in silence, before exploding into a storm that cannot be undone. Such was the fury carved into Azfaran's chest when the news reached him. Betrayal had become truth. Isvalon had sent their elite soldiers in secret into Arendelle's lands, a move that openly disrespected the ultimatum sent by Arendelle before their warning had not been a bluff. It was not an empty threat, and now blood had spilled on the prison walls because of such arrogance. Azfaran stood at the northern tower's balcony, staring at the dark sky that promised no rain, but called forth a storm. The wind tugged at his long cloak, colored like wet earth, and his black hair fluttered like fog, lost without direction. He spoke no words, but the tension around him hung heavy in the air. He knew too well, one wrong move could fracture the entire alliance, but silence could just as easily be its ruin. Call every elder, call all commanders, and summon the advisors tonight. We will not sleep until justice begins to take shape. He finally said. His voice was not loud, but strong enough to chill the bones of every guard who heard it. The night assembly in the stone hall, hurried footsteps echoed through the long corridor. Torches burned along the walls, but even their light seemed dim against the heavy silence that settled in the air. Inside the stone hall, elders from Arendelle's tribes had gathered. Commanders leaned quietly against the stone pillars. Some who once resisted unity now sat side by side with their former rivals. War had drawn them together. Under the looming shadow of Isvalon, Azfaran entered. No. Herald called his name, but everyone stood. He didn't ask for their respect. With a raised hand, he signaled them to sit and walked to the center of the great circle. You all know, he said, this land carries wounds that should never have been reopened. Isvalon crossed our warning, sending elite soldiers into a neutral zone we all vowed to protect, all under the name of rescuing the princess. Fists clenched, others bowed their heads, trying to contain their anger. One thing we must guard, Azfaran continued, is that we do not act like savages. We will not respond like cowards, but as a nation that knows the worth of honor. He turned slowly, making eye contact with each of them, one by one. His gaze was not accusing, but it left no room for weakness. What shall we do? Azfaran asked. An old commander stood, his gray beard thick, and his eyes as hard as steel, forged through decades of war. King Azfaran, he said, this insult was not just against your letter, it was a wound to the dignity of all. Arendelle, they think we dare not strike. Then let them learn that we can reach through walls and take life. A murmur of agreement rose from the hall. Suddenly, a voice rose from the corner. It was Marin, who had been silent all this time. We must not strike directly, she said. That's what they want. But, we can draw Azfaran out. How? Asked one of the commanders. Marin turned to Azfaran, then slowly walked toward the center. Use their rage against them. Send something that will boil Azfaran's blood, not an army. A symbol, cut off a finger from one of the dead elite soldiers. Send it to Isvalon. Tell them it belonged to Princess Ryza. Say this is what happens when they mock Arendelle's warning. Silence fell. Azfaran didn't answer right away, but in his eyes, the weight of thought was clear. That finger is not just a piece of flesh. Marin continued. It is a message. It is a letter, not written in ink, but in the limit of our patience. She turned slowly and looked at every face. We will send the finger, Azfaran finally said. We will say it is not a declaration of war, but a sign. One more mistake, and there will be no throne left for Sharfan to sit on. Preparing the inkless letter the next night. The prison doors below were opened. 3 corpses from Isvalon's elite troops who had died from their injuries were carried out. They were given a proper burial. But from one of them, a single finger was removed. There was no joy in this act, no vengeance. It was done in silence, in prayer, and in the belief that this was the only way to prevent a greater war. Azfaran himself wrote the letter that would be sent with the finger. He wrote it in the ancient Isvalon script, the one his grandmother once taught him, so that Sharfan would know who had written it, and so the message would sting deeper. To King Sharfan, in the great city behind the walls of Isvalon, we received your arrival. Though it was not invited, you sent swords into peaceful lands. Even after we warned you with honor and words, we now answer with this, a finger not from any name, but claimed to be from Princess Riza. Consider this the price for soldiers sent without welcome. One more bold step, and we shall not send a finger. We shall send a head. Erindale. The letter was rolled and placed inside a small wooden box. The preserved finger was wrapped in linen and set inside. The box was sealed with red wax, bearing the symbol of Erindale. The silent delivery 3 riders rode eastward. They carried no royal sigils. They were only couriers. But their mission was more dangerous than bringing 500 warriors at the border. They handed the box to a disguised informant from as a merchant. This was not official diplomacy. This was silence, sharpened to a knife's edge. Far ahead, dark clouds gathered in the eastern sky. The wind from Isvalon blew cold, carrying an unspoken warning. And behind the towering walls of the ancient kingdom, Sharfan would soon receive a message that would test the limits of his sanity. Between threat and conviction, the night hung silently over the rooftops of Erindale, like an endless black cloth. The stars peeked shyly, as if unsure whether they should witness what was being planned by the humans below. In one corner of the watchtower, far from the passing of soldiers and advisors, Azfaran stood quietly. Beside him, soft footsteps were heard. Marin had come without a sound. As always, no greetings were exchanged. There was no need. Both of them looked eastward, where Isvalon shimmered faintly behind distant mountains. Do you think he'll believe it belonged to Riza? Azfaran asked softly, his voice nearly blending with the whispering wind. Sharfan won't stop to think. He will be furious before he even checks it, Marin replied. And when he's furious, he'll make mistakes, Azfaran murmured. Silence returned. But within that silence were waves of worry and calculation. Victory was not only about strength, but about knowing when to hold back and when to strike. Sharfan was raised in a golden tower. He never knew what it felt like to lose. Marin continued. So he won't respond with honor but with arrogance. Azfaran nodded slowly. And that arrogance can be turned into an opening. But it wasn't only tactics that filled Azfaran's thoughts. Behind his eyes was something deeper, a belief in Erindale, a land once seen as a place of exile, now standing as a force shaping history. You know, Marin, he said, I used to believe Erindale was just a place to hide, but I was wrong. It's not a place of exile. It's the place where we rediscover what it means to be a nation. Marin looked at him. What do you mean? Here, no noble blood is holier than the blood of its people. No language is greater than the songs sung in the homes of the common folk. We build not from thrones, but from wounds. And every home we raise on this land is a declaration that honor doesn't have to be inherited, can be created. Marin gave a small smile. That's why Sharfan is afraid. He sees us and sees a mirror of the future that no longer needs Isvalon. Azfaran touched the stone wall of the tower. I want our people to live, not just survive. I want them to say I'm from Erindale with pride, not because of some war victory, but because we never lied about who we are. Marin lowered her gaze, then said, and tonight, we act not because we want war. We act so that we won't need war later. Azfaran took a deep breath. The wind carried the scent of damp soil and old wood. Sharfan will strike back. Maybe tomorrow. Maybe a month from now. But when he steps outside his walls, he will find that Arendelle is not the same. Meren looked at Azfaran deeply, and when that moment comes, we will not stand as people full of hatred, but as guardians of the future. The sky remained dark, yet there was a sliver of light on the eastern horizon. Not dawn, not fire, but something in between, as if a sign that history was writing itself. Soon after, Meren was about to return inside, but before her steps could fade, a sound was heard in the distance. A hum, rhythmic, soft yet steady. The sound grew, turning into a chorus of voices. The soldiers of Arendelle were singing a song not born from a palace, but from the homes and forests where they grew up. Their voices weren't perfect, sometimes off-key, but they were filled with spirit. This land is not a king's, nor does it belong to the sword, but to those who fight, who know justice and honor through every day. Azfaran and Meren stood still, letting the song fill the air around them. No commands were given, no instructions needed, only conviction, born from the awareness that they were defending something greater than themselves. Arendelle is singing, Moran whispered as looked far to the east, and the world will hear it. ... Fire, wrapped in coal. Azfaran once again stood on the northern tower's balcony, but now, he wasn't just watching the sky, he was watching a future yet to be written. He knew this step was a gamble, but silence was no longer an option. He must realize the world had changed. Arendelle was no longer just a land of outcasts and exiles. It was now a new center of power, and within that power, burned a fury that should never be awakened. That night, Meren came beside him. She spoke, softly, you know. One small message can change history. Azfaran nodded. Double quotes, yes, and tonight, we just wrote the next chapter.